We have a very special guest, my dear friend, Mr. Dedrick Sims. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
So glad to have you. So before we get into the content, I wanted to share a little bit more about your bio and who you are. Your bio is actually very extensive. So I just pulled out some really fascinating tidbits about you. You are currently the CEO of Sims Fayola Foundation.
I am.
And the mission of your foundation is to improve the life outcomes of urban males through developing and designating charter schools, single gender and co-ed, partnering with school district and school leaders to increase their capacity to serve young urban men, and creating national forums to discuss the impact of school community initiatives and legislation on the success of young men. That's extremely important. You have participated in many different professional developments, including at Harvard's Project Zero. And you have written 2 books. You are a published author, and you provide professional training all over the United States and across the globe to educators who are interested in single gender learning and school design through an equity lens. You hold many different offices and have held offices. You were appointed to the Governor's Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Council. You were a youth commissioner for the city of Aurora. You are a past board president of the Young Philanthropists Foundation. You are senior education advisor to a Mississippi state representative, and you served our great nation in the Army. Thank you so much for your service. And you are a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. That is just a tiny, tiny bit of your very impressive resume. And so when we were talking, now you and I have known each other, I think it's been 10 years. I kind of thought back, like, when did we first meet? And it was when you first came to Colorado and you were starting your Sims Fayola school. And I had an opportunity to work with your boys, teaching them music. And they were the most amazing, most disciplined young men that I have worked with. And I just applaud you for your heart and the work that you did in opening your school. And so we've been talking about your journey and brain science and how boys learn differently than girls, because physiologically they're different. And as an educator, you know, we've been talking about in general how boys are more active. So they really need to run around, you know, they can't really sit still, and especially when they're young. It's an issue when you expect kids to sit down for a long time. But now that we're in quarantine and educators everywhere are having to teach through a screen, you know, we're exacerbating this issue of, you know, excessive screen time and how that impacts the brains of boys and their learning. But then how does that impact young men as they become high schoolers and then go to college and become independent? So we're going to talk through some of the science, and then you're going to give us some tidbits as educators and parents who are at home who didn't go to school to become teachers, who might want to do some things differently, and just give young men some tools to advocate for themselves as well. So I'm going to hand it over to you. So here's my first question.
Well, let me just say, I'm really glad to be on the show. I think that, you know, who's looking to be in a position of advocating for education, I think being able to understand, like what we're talking about today, digital boy versus natural boy, in terms of the impact of, you know, what I call of outside inputs, right? The outside input today is screen time, but it could be different things, right? On how how boys actually process information. And so I'm super excited to have this conversation with you, and hopefully hope that your audience walk away with some key takeaways and some things that they can change their lives tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, right, exactly. Steps. That's what we're all about. It's like, okay, like let's give people tools to use right away. So it's really important that we have relevant conversations around education, and you are an expert in this field. This is your passion, what you've been studying. And so I'm really excited to learn from you tonight. So my first question for you is, how and why did you focus your educational journey on single gender learning? Because you started out, your story is amazing. You started out as a substitute teacher, then you became a science teacher, and then you became a principal, and you've worked your way all the way up, and you're currently working on your PhD, and I know you just got your superintendent's license. So you are serious. You are the real deal when it comes to not only being highly qualified, but having skin in the game and doing the work as a male educator. Tell me about your journey to focusing on single gender education.
That's a good question. I grew up. I grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and my friends and I, we all hung around each other, and and had fun, but we saw that there was a difference in achievement between boys and girls. And when I became a teacher, one of the things I wanted to do was to equal the playing field and make sure that people knew that boys were just as inquisitive and just as smart and just as forward leaning as girls are, but the way that we access information and use information is very different, right? We tend to look at how things are done versus what's said. Action oriented, testosterone causes us to do that. And so I just saw a whole bunch of my friends being left behind, right? They didn't have the ability to have what we call a bridge brain, to be able to access information not only through verbal space, right, but also through action-oriented spaces. And so as a teacher, I made it just kind of my mission to make sure that everybody in my classroom was achieving from a gender perspective, as well as through a cultural perspective, to make sure that I was aware of some of the cultural proclivities of my classroom from an ethnicity standpoint. And so that's what got me into this work. And the more I dug into it, the more fascinated I got. And and part of me was just feeling sorry. I was feeling bad for boys, right? I was feeling bad that boys were kind of, not achieving at the levels that, and being recognized at the level that they were capable of, because of the way the education system was built, right? It really leans itself towards the way girls interact with information and answer questions.
Well, I mean, I can concur, because we look at the data biologically, girls mature a little bit faster than boys, and how, like you said, how they process. And I think traditionally the way we've taught has catered more to girls. And I think, well, you look at the teaching force, it's 80% women, right? And so we tend to say, oh, that boy, he's so active, you need to sit down, right? And then the girls are sitting down and they're prim and proper. And these are generalities, but I think we can tend to support girls a little bit more than we support boys, and put labels around the boys, not understanding that boys do learn differently.
And also just, thinking about how girls and boys interact, with adults. Girls tend to mimic what they see in adults and try to seek acceptance, especially in their moms, around what it means to be a female, right? Girls get practice all the time in what it means to be a woman and to be a female, right? From like all the time. Boys don't get that practice, right? And so because education is a social industry or a social profession, all the social wins as well as the social ills enter education and enter our classrooms, and we end up repeating the things that we do in regular life in our classrooms. And so girls are reinforced at times and boys are not reinforced at times.
So what do you see? You mentioned a little bit like testosterone. Obviously, that's a big difference between girls and boys.
Yep.
Can you dig a little bit deeper into some of the biological differences connected to learning that you've seen between boys and girls?
Yeah, so just as a basic level, testosterone is the hormone that causes it's a hormone of action, right? So it's meant to cause action to happen, whether it's, like, what am I going to do? Most of the times women find this within their boyfriends or their husbands, through conversations. Like you'll come home and you had a bad day and you just want to have a conversation and get it out. But we find ourselves trying to fix it, right? Trying to offer solutions. And the girl's like, I don't want you to fix it. I just want you to listen to me. Well, the testosterone in us causes us to just want to fix it. It's an action kind of hormone. And also when boys develop from a brain space, we compartmentalize things and really don't have the ability, or we don't have the proclivity, should I say, the proclivity to kind of intertwine both the emotional compartments of our brain as well as the logical compartments of our brain. It's one of the reasons why we will leave an argument as a guy with our wives or our girlfriend, and like we want to get away, right? Take a drive, walk, and then we'll come back and say, hey baby, I thought about that thing. So let's talk about it. I thought about it, right? Because we've given ourselves the space to move from an emotional space over to a logical space. And I mentioned earlier that there's this thing called bridge brains, to where boys actually have like full, like an increased awareness of both the logical part and the emotional part. And then we can like process in the moment. We're more verbal and we get emotive. Like I know, guys who are just always talking and always verbal and emotive, like in touch with their feelings. Like these are bridge brains, right? But for the most part, that's a girl's world, right? Even growing up, in terms of biological maturation, girls tend to develop the verbal and the linguistic side of their brain a lot quicker than boys. And that's why you see girls more, I think, more successful, right? Whatever you call that, successful in like preschool and in kindergarten, especially now that kindergarten is a new first grade, right? To where kids are focusing on reading and arithmetic and so on and so forth. When it used to be movement and like small motor movement that boys kind of excelled in. But now, kindergarten is teaching boys that, unfortunately, kindergarten is showing boys, they don't belong in school, right? Sometimes they can do that, right? Sometimes what kindergarten is now asking for is what they used to ask for in first and second grade, and boys just have not developed that yet, right? From a brain standpoint, from a cognitive standpoint, like that part of their brain hasn't evolved yet.
It's interesting. I just wanted to interject because now that makes a lot of sense, because when we look at the top countries in the world in education, like Finland, who they spend a lot of time with playtime at the beginning, the first several years of school, very little instruction around, math and literacy like we do here in the United States, where we pound that in. Do you think that might be, I mean, obviously it works because their young people are outperforming because they are spending more time with the social part, the other part of their brain versus, the logical part. I mean, do you think that's something that is playing into their logic and understanding of how young people learn?
I think that there are a lot of reasons why Finland may be doing better, like quote unquote better, right? I think there are a whole bunch of inputs that when you look at to include cultural inputs and how communities value education and educators, right? So there's a whole lot of noise in that equation that comes out. But I do agree with you that their kind of emphasis and intentionality around playtime is important. I mean, you think about it. When you involve kids in playtime and interaction with other humans, there's tons of advantages that come from that, right? Specifically from a boy, like we learn how to be emotional, we learn how to have conversation, we learn how to take a look at how our actions impact others, right? So then we have the ability to develop empathy and sympathy, right? But for boys, because our proclivity is towards focusing on things that's visual, right? Whenever you take out the human experience, you take out the human experience and developing all those other things I mentioned, like emotional, those things that we tend to guide ourselves towards what our body naturally does. And if we put kids in front of screens all the time, then you negate that part, and so then you end up having this young man who may come across as antisocial, less verbose, less emotive, socially awkward, because we spend most of our time in front of a screen, right? Whether it was our choice or our mom plopped us down in front of the screen to say, hey, I need you to be there for a minute while I work on a paper, right? Whatever it is. So I think countries that prioritize playtime, getting outside, interacting with other people, I think they have an increased likelihood of helping to develop a more whole child, is what I would say to that question.
So we know, like, I teach middle school, so we know, like, biologically that frontal lobe fog literally is physical. And so it comes forward and then it starts to slowly go back once they get out of middle school, go to high school. And then when we're talking about connecting both hemispheres of the brain, we know the brain does not fully connect until you're about 28 years old, 26 to 28. But we know that I think I read that girls actually, that connection starts to develop a little bit sooner than in boys. Am I correct in that, with that information?
That is correct. So typically the prefrontal cortex of the brain develops around 26. And it's one of the things that rental car companies base their policies on in terms of people who rent cars. Like, they rather take the chance on someone who has the ability, who's thinking logically, because their prefrontal cortex, the executive center of their brain, is functioning more than the emotive pieces, right? So they're trying to reduce road rage and people chasing folks because they feel crazy, but it still happens. But yeah, 26, 27, 28, definitely by 28. I mean, it should be developed. So yes, you are definitely on track with that science.
So I'm really fascinated with this topic of brain science. I got my introduction to this conversation when I did a book study, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zretta Hammond. It's a combination of talking about brain science as well as this cultural interpersonal piece and understanding individualism and collectivism ideas. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of talking about this. But I want to go deeper with you, specifically around single gender education. You've been focusing on building schools that are just for boys. And so I want you to take us a little bit deeper into this digital boy versus natural boy. I'm going to let you take it away right now. Okay. So,
All right, let's do it. So I'm going to share my screen. And by the way, I am a huge fan of her work. All right. So let's get into this digital boy versus natural boy just a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about from birth to age 13. Here are 5 points that I really want people to remember. One, limit screen time, right? Just keep repeating to yourself, limit screen time, limit screen time, limit screen time. If you allow electronic devices, like, spend most of the time on educational media and not entertainment. And I'll talk a little bit later about how long to spend on the educational media. Well, there it is, no more than 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours per day for entertainment, right? Except perhaps on the weekends. This goes back to what I said earlier about a boy's proclivity to lean towards more visual things, and that we don't, like, our brain doesn't naturally develop a lot of the emotive and social components that girls do. Number 4, rarely sacrifice outside playtime for media time. Like, outside time is more important. So this goes back to what you said about Finland. And do not sacrifice reading time for media time, right? Reading is much more valuable in terms of brain development for screen time, especially in the earliest brains, right? So in boys, our brain tends to overemphasize visual learning, right? It's one of the reasons why men and boys are visual, right? We're attracted to things and people who are interesting and beautiful. And so our first attraction is towards that, right? Where a female or a lady's attraction may be, especially like you think about relationships and like friendships, more towards humor. You know, is he humor? Does he make me laugh? And those kind of things. But boys are like, visual, right? Boys need a lot of physical kinesthetic time throughout the day, right? For brain centers to develop, as well as cognitive fluency. Now, I want to stop for a second and talk about this idea of cognitive fluency. Cognitive fluency is the ease of thinking about something. I want that to sit in for a minute. It's the ease of thinking about something. So for example, it's easier to think about making hot dogs for dinner than it is for making lasagna for dinner. Because with a hot dog, all you have to do is get a pot, some bread, a wiener, some mustard, ketchup, whatever it is. Like that's pretty easy to think about. But to think about making lasagna for dinner, you got to think about how many layers I'm going to put on there, what kind of cheeses I'm going to use. But like it's just that like cognitive fluency. So that kinesthetic movement allows boys cognitive fluency, the ease of thinking about something to actually develop easier, right? So what I want to talk about here, these are kind of just from pre-birth all the way through 13, and as you mentioned earlier, Priscilla, that I'm going to put a PowerPoint together video about 14 through 25, but we're going to talk about this map, and so it's cute, right? I love this kid. So because of the Y chromosome specifically, boys often develop their gross motor skills earlier than girls. This is one of the reasons why, prior to the hyper accountability time that we're in now in terms of testing, that boys did well in pre-K and in kindergarten, because kindergarten was all about, fine motor skills, taking naps, just, colors and things like that. But now it's like, can you read? How fast can you read? What's your reading? Like, what's your reading rate? Like, what is your, decoding skills, whatever. So, but boys in this age between birth and 2 years old, right? Screen time should be kept at a bare minimum, because if it's not, then it significantly impacts word development in the brain during that time. And I would say also until stage 2, right, which is age 3 to 6, avoid putting young men in front of screen, like child gazing and playtime. Like even if you have your phone in your hand and you just hand it to your kid while you're sitting in the car seat just to keep them busy, I would avoid that. If you do it, I would do it for no more than an hour. Because again, boys' proclivity in brain development tends to lean itself towards visual. And at that time of their development, they are sponges. This is when you should talk to your kid. This is when you should interact with them a lot, especially boys. Talk to them. Let them hear the words that you're saying so they can develop their own vocabulary. And also let them be able to read your face so that they can see whether or not you're upset or you're happy. Like this develops empathy in kids, right? And the ability to look at nonverbal cues, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say that more than an hour every day in front of a screen will do damage. Like it would do damage in terms of gene expression and development of the brain. So instead, like I said, use a lot of intentional verbal environment to keep them going. Read to them and encourage non-structured play. So non-structured play is, hey, I'm just going to put you in the yard and just watch you. I'm going to put you in this room and close the door. It's going to be you and I'm just going to watch you and give you no rules at all. I just want to see how you interact with your environment, how you interact to pain when you hurt yourself, how you interact to joy when you feel good about things, how you even interact to me responding to you, right? Like if I see you do something and I smile at you, how do you interact with that? Like, do you smile back at me or do you not smile back at me? Do you grimace at me or do you keep on moving to do other things? Those things can teach you a whole lot, but it also can teach him a whole lot too about nonverbal cues. At this time, also, it's cool to build purpose and mission and independence. And when you have this non-structured play, then you get this independence, right? There's no rules, just let them do what they want to do. And then just be really vigilant about passive stimuli, like your phone. Like if you are on your phone, you got your kid next to you and they're gazing and they're in this age range, turn the phone off. Because you're like tapping into what boys tend to do in terms of visual stimuli and not developing their vocabulary and their motor spaces.
Can I interject here? Because I see this so much at restaurants and when parents are out and they give their kids that iPad while they're having adult conversations or having a meal. And I cringe every time because their children have learned not to be satisfied unless they have that technology in front of them.
No, and I see it too. And because I know the science behind it, I'm like, I just want to have a conversation with them, but that time is not the right time. So let's move on to age 3 to 5, stage 2. So typically what happens is that when kids get into kindergarten, and especially now, and it's so relevant right now with COVID-19 and schools are out, that schools are moving to screen time, to teach. But typically, even outside of that, when kids start getting to kindergarten and preschool, especially around technology, schools tend to use more of technology to get kids to interact, right? But it's just for boys, it's just not a good thing. I would say, and I think I have in one of these slides, that if you have preschool, you had kids in preschool, and you have the ability to ask the question, how much screen time do you use in terms of educating my kid? Ask that question, right? If it's more than one, if it's more than 2 hours a day, like that's probably not the place I would want to have my kid at. But again, I know everybody's situation is very different. So that's why I said be vigilant. Like your son's maturation is definitely at stake. Now, when I say if you're going to allow kids on screen 1 to 2 hours a day, make it educational, at least make it to where they're actually gaining something and learning. And if you have the ability, and this is strictly a financial, I think, argument, that you have the ability to do genetic testing, I think it helps, because what it does is that it helps you think about, I'm going to pull up my notes up here because I want to make a point about this. And the point is that right here. So there are some obesity genes that could be prevalent in people. And if you can do genetic testing for these specific genes, I'll call them out. The first one is called DRDO, and it's responsible for eating behaviors. The second one is MC4R. It's responsible for appetite. And the next gene is called FTO. It's responsible for body fat. And incidentally, they're all correlated directly with screen time issues in growing kids.
Wow,
Yes.
that's amazing.
It's all correlated with screen time issues in growing kids. So if you have these genes and they're very active, screen time calls you to sit, right? To kind of be sedentary and like to be in one spot. And if you already have this proclivity because you have these genes to develop, a level of obesity, this is bad. This is bad. And so I know, when I looked it up, genetic testing can go as low as $50 to as much as $2,000, right? I think it depends on the level of genetic testing that you want to get. But if you have the ability to do that, like I would definitely, sponsor that, right? To say, look, I think you should do this. I think you should try to get genetic testing as much as possible. So especially in that age, from 3 to 5 years old, you can be proactive and jump in front of a lot of issues as relates to obesity and health if you have the ability to do so. Sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. So stage 3, 6 to 9 years old, be aware of the effects of screen time on sleep time. I want to make a point that the blue light that's in phones and also that's in screens, it tricks the melatonin in our brain, right? Melatonin is responsible for our sleep. And I even now take melatonin pills, right? Because my brain just continuously moves all the time. And so I take these melatonin pills, just to make sure that I activate the melatonin to allow me to get a good night's sleep. But the blue screen causes the melatonin. It tricks the brain into thinking that it's time to get up, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're going to bed and you're watching your screen and you're trying to read things that put you to sleep, it's actually doing the opposite, right? It's actually doing the opposite. Is that sleep and at this age, sleep is crucial for mood control, and that anxiety and stress can become an issue for school-age children at this time if you allow them to put themselves to sleep using their phones, right? Now, personally, I would not give anyone 9 years old or younger a cell phone. I wouldn't. I mentioned earlier that the male brain is visual. Like once he receives his cell phone, he's going to figure like this is a great deal of his learning and interaction is going to happen on that cell phone, creating what I call neurotoxicity, right? And I just wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. So study your son to decide when it's appropriate to give him the phone. But for me personally, I wouldn't do it prior to 9 years old, because those birth to 9 years old is so crucial in terms of brain development and kids, especially boys, developing the social parts of himself, the emotive parts of himself. And if you already know that the brain leans or pulls him towards visual, if you give him a visual instrument to focus on, that's all he's going to focus on all the time.
Well, I'm kind of old fashioned. I say don't give them a phone until they start driving, because there is no reason for them to have a cell phone. It is, listen, Dedrick, as a teacher, I have students who would rather go to to the office and have detention than give up their cell phone. They are that addicted to technology. It is a scary
kids? You said kids or teachers?
kids.
Oh, kids. Yeah. No, I agree. I've seen it too. I mean, as a former principal, I've seen kids throw away school for their phones. Like, you know what? Forgive me, send me out, expel me. You know, I'm like, wait, what? Like, do you hear yourself? Right? So, stage 4, 10 to 13, masterpiece, right? Still unsculpted, tattered. So let me just say this. This is a very important part of male development, because this is also when morals start to develop, right? Kids get rushes of affirmation by either doing things right or doing things wrong. It's like it's that dopamine rush, right? And I'll put what I have here on my notes. The early adolescent boy needs dopamine rush to happen from real life things, not through screens, not through screens, but through real life things, because screens don't fit well with natural reward chemistry genes for the right things, right? It's different. So if you're playing a game, what's that video game they used to play where they steal cars? And what is it?
Oh, I don't know.
They used to
The game where
they steal cars and but anyway, the point is, if you steal the car, it's on the tip of my tongue too. When you steal the car, like you get this reward on screen.
wow.
And so in this age of 10 to 13, confusing them with like where they get their dopamine rush from. Like dopamine is the like the reward hormone that makes you feel good when you do something right. So if you're doing something right, is being involved in a gang, whether it's on screen or stealing a car on screen or killing somebody on screen, then you tend to lose the ability to separate reality, because in reality, you don't get rewards from stealing cars or killing people or those things, right? Like you get a whole different kind of reward, which is called jail, right? So it's important during this time to limit that kind of exposure, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it's on the tip of my tongue. It's called Grand Theft Auto. That's it, Grand Theft Auto. To where they get rewards for doing this kind of stuff. Now, the only way that I would say that this makes sense is that if you have those kids in this age, 10 to 13, enrolled in a camp that talks about morals, or they have a mentor that talks about morals, that keeps them in line. But if their only mentor or their only exposure around what's right and what's wrong is through their screen, for boys, it tends to go downhill real fast, right? Also during this time, there's what we call brain pruning, right? So for the things that you don't do, like for example, that piano behind you, right? Like that it takes time and practice in order to create musical masterpieces and things that even just sound right. But if you stop working or stop playing the piano over time, especially in 10 to 13 years old, you're not doing that, then the brain kind of prunes that part of your brain and makes room for the things that you are doing over and over and over again. So things are manipulative and conniving or on screen or whatever, then those things tend to get reinforced over and over again in your brain. It creates this neural pathway. It creates this I call neural footprint. It's sort of like you walking over and over again from one place to the next, like the grass gets kind of trodden down, and all of a sudden you create this trail. The same thing happens when your brain, but with your brain, it develops what we call myelin sheaths, right, around the neuron. I think I have this in here. I don't. But so what it does is it creates this, in the brain, you have, if this is a brain cell, you have a neuron right here, and then you have dendrites right here that interact with other dendrites, other neurons. And so say for example, if you burn your hand, there's a sensation, an electronic pulse that sends messages through the neuron, through the dendrites, release neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters fits into the receptors, and then it sends it up to your brain, and it causes you to move your hand, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what happens is that if this happens over and over and over and over and over and over again, a process called myelination happens. And with myelination, the neuron gets a myelin sheath, like it's fatty tissue wrapped around the neuron that causes it to be more efficient at doing that. So folks who play the piano, football, golf, basketball, baseball, all things you got to do over and over and over again when you have a specific motion, myelination has happened. This happens at age 13, 10 to 13. It's one of the reasons why if you don't catch boys in the age 10 to 13, some people say it's almost impossible to catch them later, right? Because this is the part where, think about it, they're developing their moral compass and what they think to be right or wrong. Their brain is pruning parts of their brain that they're not using or have not used, right? And they're developing sort of this neural pathway through myelination around what do you keep doing. So those are going to be the things that boys tend to fall back to when they become adults, because those things are already ingrained. So very active pruning happens right there. They start, dopamine is released, which is that kind of the reward hormone around things that are reinforced. And so if you reinforce being a good guy, if you reinforce being a gentleman, if you reinforce being a big brother or a mentor, then those are the things that even when they become an adult, they'll fall back to: hard work, being a mentor, being a good guy, so on and so forth. If reinforcement happens through screens, through things that don't have like human contact and human conversation around, then those are the things that tend to make them less social, kind of socially awkward, kind of focused on things that just like has no real connection to real life. Now, I don't know if how you want to go into porn, but that's part of it. Like it's like we talk about porn as well, and how, again, boys are visual, right? And so you think about porn on the screen, visual. So we can have a deeper conversation about that, but I don't know. So we'll we'll talk. But I want to stop sharing now just to kind of answer some questions that you may have. I would think the general takeaways are: one, to limit screen time. I mean, even all throughout a boy's life, right? Especially early in their life when they need so much human interaction to develop the skills that their brain typically just don't focus on, right? Our boys' brain don't focus on emotional, social connections, those kind of things. So those things come from human interaction and development. And I know that people are busy and have 2 or 3 jobs trying to make it work. But if you plop that kid down in front of a computer just to kind of get some time to yourself, like, especially if it's a boy, like, you're doing more damage than you would if you didn't have anything in front of them.
It's really funny because I know you kind of switched from that last topic really quickly, but as educators, when we catch students on their computers or their cell phones and it's not education content, if a girl is not on education content, she's watching some cartoon video with girls and flowers or a dance video, right? And boys are on the inappropriate. Like that's what they're looking at versus girls if they're deciding that they're going to stray away from educational content. So, I mean, there is definitely some truth to the science that you're talking about. So as we are looking at changing the way we are structuring our lessons and how we're teaching, because we don't know, there's talk that we may be at home even through the fall semester. And so students are required to do so much of their learning through the screen. Based on this new information, are there some different things that teachers and parents can do, maybe a different way of asking a question or a different way of assessing to keep in mind the needs for boys?
It is. So here's what I tell teachers around the country when we have conversations about how to create learning experiences for boys, is that I would create it to be more action oriented than emotive or feeling. Like for example, I would give a boy, so the scenario, right? Say for instance, you're at a gas station and you see someone pay for their gas, take their pump, put it in their car, and then they go into the gas station, and you see someone come behind them, take the gas pump out, but start filling their tank up or their portable tank. How would you feel about that? I wouldn't ask them how they feel about it. I would ask them what would they do. Because remember, I told you earlier that testosterone is an action hormone, and that's what make boys that are filled boys, filled boys. Asking a young man what would he do would probably elicit a more elongated, verbose response, and probably more any more emotive response about it, because boys feel really strongly tied to what they do, than asking them how they feel about it. Right? If they ask them how they feel about it, they may put a few things down on paper, but ask them what they do about it, they will fill it up. Right? So, what I would say in this time of COVID-19 and remote learning, but even when we get back, like the way you structure questions and structure your learning environment, if you make it more action oriented, or when it comes to boys, be conscious about how you're constructing questions, and lean more towards questions that cause impact and action, then I think you'll be more successful with young men. Man, look, boys have such genius, like, in their brains, and they are ready to get it out, and even sometimes they don't know how to get it out. But I can tell you this, that testosterone causes us to be action oriented, and and causes us to want to fix things, and like, so tap into that. Like, don't make school different than how people are naturally made up. Like, don't do that. You're setting yourself up for failure. And I would also say that to people who are making standardized tests. Like, not only look at it from a cultural standpoint in terms of having cultural references in those questions, to where people can attach themselves to, but also gender specific references that boys and girls can kind of lean towards.
Wow, that's fascinating. I think we had a conversation about when I talked with the psychiatrist about the brain science and development of children who are going through adolescence and puberty, right? Asking kids why. I mean, I think before I learned this, I would always ask, why would you do that? They would make these really bad decisions and go, why would you do it? And they would say, I don't know. And they really truly don't know. Like, they're not, they and I've started saying, well, you're the only one who does know. Why did you do that? But I have a story where, okay, so I teach band, and I have a student who played clarinet, and right on the front row, in the middle of me conducting, he got up, walked all the way to the back of the room to where the percussion is, and I stopped, and it was almost like he was sleepwalking, and I instead of saying, why did you walk to the back of the room, I said, are you aware that you just got up and walked to the back of the room? And he looked around and he goes, no. And I'm like, yeah, why don't you come back and sit down at the front? I mean, people wouldn't believe me when I talk about these stories of how young people in their development, what their actions, right? So that's really good to know, that don't ask young people why they did something. And when you do ask them, especially to boys, what would you do in a situation, and even in an assessment? I think that's a really tangible thing that educators can do to change an assessment, or to push the thinking and to garner a different kind of response from young boys. My brain is going, and I think even after this conversation, I'm going to continue to think about, it's one thing to say, okay, I want you to go outside and do 20 or 30 minutes of exercise. Okay, so it goes beyond that with boys, because they need so much more physical time than just 20 or 30 minutes a day, especially if they're spending 2 hours or more on screen time. It just seems like it's not as balanced as far as developing young boys. But I think another question I have is, how do we enforce the connection of both hemispheres of the brain? Because that's the goal, right? The goal is to usher in that connection, to work young people through thinking about what they could do. And when you were talking about that 10 to 13 age range, like, we have someone who comes in and called Young Men of Purpose, and they talk with our young boys about these decisions, and they watch videos, and they're like, what would you do differently in the situation? If one of your friends told you, let's go rob a bank, what would you do? So walking students through these scenarios, I would imagine in that 10 to 13 age range, is vital. But would that look the same high school to college, or there's some different things that we can look at to help young boys?
No, I think it looks the same, right? So between 10 and 13, I mentioned that's kind of like the solidifying stage where almost like the point of no return, unless you have some like very intentionality, if you super intentional about changing trajectories. I would say whatever we talk about from 10 to 13 projects itself, through 21, 25 years old, right? Um, so, up until prefrontal cortex maturation, right? I would say it's the same thing, right? Continue to talk morals, put things in your life that allow you to make great decisions and really be able to empathize with people, and to really focus on things still that like spending your time focusing on things that are not screen related, right? Like only when it's necessary, right, to be in front of a screen, be in front of a screen. I think the danger right now with COVID-19 and everybody's going to screens, like, clearly kids are in front of screens more than 2 hours because they're having to be in school on Google Classrooms and Zoom calls, but also to get their playtime in, playing with, Grand Theft Auto and, Fortnite and all those things as well. I just think it's important for parents to be aware of that and to be able to have things outside of their lives, like on the weekends. Maybe they're in a camp on the weekends. Maybe they're mentoring on the weekends, or something on the weekend that gets them out of the screen, that causes them to be in a space of responsibility, so where they can develop empathy and sympathy and those kind of and mentoring attributes. Would very helpful on the weekends.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing you say is the connection between, sleep, stress, these things that are taking away from a young man's ability to fully develop their brain and be ready to receive new information and learning. I guess I would encourage parents and educators to really limit, and I know it's a lot easier for parents to put their kids in front of technology because they're working, or they don't understand what their child's supposed to be learning at school. But this can be a really dangerous thing, this box.
Yep.
That becomes the babysitter, and this is not to put any judgment on parents, because as a parent too, like, I have to make sure that I budget my time between what I'm doing for work and making sure my son, who is going into high school, and all of these things that we talked about, it's like, yeah, like I see that. And I tell him, like, you got to go out. So you have to go outside. So I kick him out of the house and I say, you've got to go exercise, go ride your bike,
Yeah.
go do something. And he's better off for it. And, it's definitely not enough, because the times have changed. Like when we were growing up, we were like outside all the time because we didn't have computers and cell phones, like we were outside, and that was like the best place to be. But these days, and especially because of the distancing that we have to do, it's really difficult for young boys to find that time. But we've got to, as parents, push that for them and find things for them to do. But also for these young men who are graduating from high school and who are in college, and like they're still in that place of their biological growth and their brain development where they need to have that physical exertion. And so, I know you love to golf, like that's your thing. I think that's a great sport because that repetition, like you're talking about, really plays in. And so maybe we can encourage our young boys to find a sport or an activity. Maybe for now it is the Wii, I mean, does that count, considering the situation?
No, it doesn't have to be the we. Like you can go outside. You don't have to be around people, but you can definitely go outside to do things. Just get outside, get human interaction. Those things are super important, right? Because humans, like, we give you feedback verbally as well as nonverbal on like your actions. So we think about age 10 to 13 when I talk about this dopamine rush, about a reward, right? So if you're in front of a human and you do something, like, we give you feedback on whether that's good, bad, or indifferent or ugly or whatever it is. Like, put yourself in a position to be able to get that, right? And as a parent in that age from 10 to 13 and beyond, continue to put your young man in that kind of position and not allow him just to sit in front of a screen and play video games all day, or to chat all day, or to do social media all day. Like if you have that kind of relationship with your kid and you hadn't lost that ability to have that kind of influence, then I would advise you to do so during that time.
You know, I hope maybe this is a good time, because change always happens in a crisis. I hope that this is a great opportunity for parents to make these changes and say, hey, we're going to turn off the screen. We're going to limit this. We're going to go back to good old days where we were more physical, where we're sitting down playing board games, where we were having fun in a more physical way than sitting on a sofa with a game box. Because I mean, this is all the movement that a lot right here, texting and Game Boy. Was that I don't play games. I was like video games. But I want to empower parents right now, from one parent to another parent, to listen to this brain science and biology. And, you know, we all want the very best for our kids. And as educators, I know as a teacher, I haven't spoken to a single teacher who wish we could get rid of all the technology, because it's like one-to-one Chromebooks, and it's like, it's all day, every class, even in, you know, the arts, it's like technology. And I want to share one more story before we wind down, that I went to Japan in October of 2018, and we did a tour of high-level high school. And, you know, Japan is #1 in the world in technology. And this was a 10-story high school. And we started at the top, we took the elevator to the top, and we walked every single floor in every single classroom. And when we got outside, it was like a 2-hour tour. And I said, I didn't notice a single computer in that school. In fact, teachers were teaching with chalk and chalkboard, and students were learning with paper and pencil. And I said, tell me about this. And they say, yeah, no, we don't have technology. And I said, we're in Japan, the #1 country in technology, in a high performing high school, and they didn't have technology. And it just blew me away. And that just stayed with me, that even, and of course, Japan, Korea, Japan, Finland, these countries are way ahead of us in public education. So they even recognize that too much technology is too much. And, you know, we can learn that. And so, you know, it's going to be a challenge for systems to change, because I know in education, we feel like our students need to have fluency, you know, but at what cost? And we're seeing that our students are losing some of that early stage development. And we're seeing that even young boys and young girls are coming to us with so many other trauma development issues that we are having to counteract, because we're not giving them a strong enough foundation. And how do we expect students to compete? Now I'm on my soapbox, okay? It's a good thing we're at the end of this conversation, because, right, I know. You know, I feel like we have not been doing service to our young people by putting them in front of so much technology and not giving them the appropriate type of development, because we need to compete, and the workforce is changing. And some of the skills that our young people need to have when they graduate from college are really, really important. And so we really need to take a look. I encourage you, because I know you want to be a superintendent, and whoever gets you as their superintendent, they're going to be really, really fortunate, because you have all of this knowledge. I know that's a plug. If you're a school district that needs a great superintendent, call Dedrick Sims, because I really firmly believe that you are going to put some systems in place that make sense, you know, for the development, and have work, and that have science behind it. Tell people where to go to find out more information, because you offer classes online, and you right now you're not able to go out and do face-to-face trainings, but you do have trainings available online. But where can people go to find you?
Absolutely. Thanks for the plug. So you can go to our website at the Sims Fayola Foundation. So it's www.s as in Sam, F as in Frank, the word foundation.org. And when you get to the homepage, you'll see this link for our Sims Fayola Foundation Academy. Click that link and go in and you can register for our classes. Some of them paid, some of them are paid, are for fee, and some of them are not, right? We have things in there for kids, for parents. Anyone can get on and kind of learn more about the work that we're doing, and also about specific subjects. So yeah, no, thank you so much, Priscilla, for the time. Thank you for the plug and around superintendency and kind of the work that we're doing now.
Now, before we go, you are actually one of my constituents as I am running for the University of Colorado Board of Regents. And you being in this education space, your opinion is really important to me. And so what are some things that are important for you to give to me? What would you like to see me working on?
I just think I want you to stick to be true to who you are as an educator, right? For at the end of the day, you are running to lead or be a liaison for an organization, for an educational organization. And so not to leave behind your education chops and the things that you know are right for kids and trade it for a political space, but to be able to advocate on behalf of kids based on what you know is to be true as an educator, right? Whether that's for programs that are developed by the schools or either collaborations with external communication organizations for CU. Never take off the educator hat. Speak your truth under that realm, and also under as a parent. And I think you'll be fine. I think the people who walk in and trade that kind of authenticity for the political piece are the ones that kind of leave behind what they could do in terms of their impact. Just be true to that, Priscilla. Priscilla is what I'll tell you, and I'll always support you if you're true to that.
Well, thank you, friend. I really respect the work that you do. It's hard work, but you do it every day, pulling up your sleeves and getting in there. And you love young people. Yes, there you go. I know you love young. I've seen you in action, and so I can vouch for the heart you have for young men. And our society is so much stronger and so much better when we have strong men who love their role and understand their role and are leading. And it's so important to invest into the psyche of young men so they feel confident and they can do what they were created to do. So thank you for leading that. And I hope that we can continue to have more amazing conversations. And so again, everybody, my special guest today, my dear friend, Dedrick Sims, amazing educator. All right. Peace out. Take care.
Peace out.